Alex. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Justin. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you taking the time. And with open access, for people who aren't familiar, just overview, what is open access?
Yeah, OpenAxis is a data storytelling platform. We're simplifying and democratizing the entire data storytelling process so you can easily find, visualize, and collaborate with data to tell stories.
I've seen mock-ups and different things you've had already on this product with ways people have used open access, which is really interesting. I imagine a thousand other use cases for this, but I want to go back to the beginning. So why start this company in the first place, Alex?
Yeah, great question. I've never done this before, so that's a really good question. Probably a couple reasons. One would be the zeitgeist of 2020. So it was the elections. There was a lot of sort of misinformation out there and disinformation. My previous gig, I was the national policy director for Andrew Yang's presidential campaign. If you guys remember him, the guy with the math hat, very sort of data-driven policies, and that was part of our ethos. And we realized that despite all the sort of data-driven approach it would take to policymaking, we had a very poor level of data literacy and transparency, whether it's within society and electorate or even within organizations. So that experience made me realize, okay, there has to be sort of a simple way for people to understand data and tell stories with data, because fundamentally everyone wants to understand, right? They want to understand themselves, their work, the world, and data is a pretty fundamental piece of that, right? It's a driver of progress. But it seemed like existing tools at the time were just too complicated or technical for other people just wanted to understand. And one really cool thing that actually happened that triggered sort of the idea of having what's open access in terms of the community of data explorers and storytellers is that the Yang Gang, as they were called, sort of our
Yeah.
fervent, ardent supporters, would take the data from our policies like universal basic income, and they would actually go on our subreddit and create their own charts. They were kind of de facto creating a community where they were collaborating. Oh, what about this? What about that? And it reached a point where I would check often to see what they would come up with because we had a small team. And I thought, wow, what a cool way to crowdsource insights and collaborate around data. Why don't we do this more often? So that coupled with the year and meeting my two amazing co-founders led us to try to figure out a way to, simplify data storytelling.
There's a lot I want to dive into with that. One that we can't just gloss over. Andrew Yang's presidential campaign. How did you get on that? How did that come about? Like, take me through that.
Yeah, that's another story because I had also never been in a presidential campaign before. I mean, for really quick context, I'm a political economist. I started my career at the UN, the United Nations. I spent 5 years abroad in Africa and the Middle East, which was a lot of fun, mostly consulting government to find ways to improve foreign direct investment. Came back to the US, started my own macroeconomic and geopolitical research firm. It's kind of cool when you try to paint a picture of what's happening in the world and you kind of mix a bit of macro analysis, political risk, applied history, and then you say, okay, well, based on what we think is happening in the world, how will that affect asset prices? The work is very interesting, but the output, in my opinion, sucks because you're just trading in the markets and there's no value
Yeah.
creation. So I got so discouraged after doing that for a couple of years that I kind of wanted to do something else. And then I saw the elections were happening in 2020. Andrew Yang popped up as this, non-ideological problem solver, very data-driven. And what I had experience in my career to that date was, data is sort of a foundation for truth and progress, but it's very hard to first have like access clean data or primary data, especially in those emerging markets. But secondly, just to tell stories and understand data. So I said, hey, this guy at least is trying to do something from a policy driven approach, right? Like I see the world as a social contract of government, private sector, and civil society. I think data is used well in the private sector, somewhat in the civil society, but not very well in policy. So the fact that he was trying that, I thought was really appealing. I had never donated to a candidate before, but I donated for the first time. I really went down the rabbit hole. I read his book, Smart People Should Build Things, which I think is an ode to entrepreneurship. Everyone should read that. And secondly, The War on Normal People, which was essentially his platform about universal basic income and a more human-centered capitalism. Read it, did all that stuff, went on the subreddit, created. I didn't even have a Reddit at the time. I just created an account just to get involved. And I found out that he was having a fundraiser in Brooklyn. So I said, okay, I'm just going to show up and see what happens. It was before the first Democratic debate. I show up, I meet him and his team. It's clear that none of them have also ever done it before, but they're all very excited. And I chat with him, and then as I'm leaving, we're leaving at the same time. And his Uber arrives before mine, and he's like, "Hey, Alex, where are you going?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm going Midtown." He's like, "Oh, me too. Hop in." So I get in the Uber. I spend 20 minutes chatting with Andrew Yang about him, myself, and I kind of just sort of pitch myself and say, "Hey, I would love to help you for free. Like I'm a political economist. I can help you with some domestic, but also foreign policy. You have some amazing ideas for domestic policy, maybe a bit light on foreign policy. Happy to help you for free." And he was like, "Okay, that's great because we don't have that much money at the time." Um, so I met with his team and him the next week, and I was actually so excited, Justin, and I wanted to show so much value that I put together two decks, two 50-slide decks full of data and charts using basically data to tell a story about the country with my unsolicited ideas. And when I got into the meeting and met him and his team afterwards, I ended up getting offered a job that I didn't even know existed, was to be sort of the policy director and sort of take over the entire kind of policy platform at that point. And it was awesome. I did it for the last 5 or 6 months. At that point, he had his main policy planks, but we had to do the big stuff after, like healthcare, and, foreign policy, climate change, regulating tech. So you never know, I guess, in life, a bit of perseverance and a bit of luck, and cool stuff happens.
Always be ready, I guess. Always ready to take advantage of the moment. That's amazing that, and I had no idea that was the context of how you got that role, which is ridiculous, Alex, by the way. Um, the timing and everything. One thing too, you mentioned, obviously you mentioned the time you spent in the Middle East and Africa as well. Like in that time, so you have that as well, but also with the work you did on smart cities, that's another part of your kind of background. I just have so many questions, but with that, take me through that work a little bit, what the involvement with that, because I think it's going to tie back into, what you're obviously seeing today with open access.
Yeah, the smart cities in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's also another serendipitous route. I was consulting for a few years across different countries. I was in South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, Abu Dhabi, and then Saudi Arabia. And then once I was finishing up that role in Saudi Arabia, one of the sort of clients offered me a job to work on this big project. He was like a billionaire prince, but an eccentric one that was very private sector focused, so really no relation to the government at all. His name is Prince Awali bin Talal. I'm sure you'll find him somewhere. He's a big investor in Twitter and Snapchat. Went to Syracuse too, like super Western dude. And he's like, you know what? I want to build a brand new city, a $20 billion smart city. I want it to be for the next generation of Saudis, especially the young ones who are studying abroad and coming back. I want to really bring this country to the next 21st century, etc. We're going to have the tallest tower in the world, but I want it to really be sort of a smart city that's just very functional. And I was sort of bought into the idea. I thought it was really cool. So I took the job and became sort of the head of research for this massive project that was planned to take many years. And the idea was to, honestly, when you have also like a pretty big budget, you can try a lot of stuff. So we invited almost everyone from Silicon Valley to come and just like try to test their ideas with us, like the
Yeah.
Hyperloop, like anything you can think of. We were like, let's try it
Yep.
out over here. But the general idea behind smart cities is just having everything with Internet of Things, so IoT, everything integrated, everything sort of seamless for um, the next sort of 21st century worker.
With all those experiences, so all of that background, there's more we didn't get into. We just don't have time. But with all of that leading you to obviously open access, and you mentioned your co-founders, how'd you meet your co-founders?
Yeah, that's a cool story too. It was during the pandemic, right? And we actually met through like a virtual sort of matchmaking of different potential founders, people who were interested in this. And the only reason why I even showed up to that was, one, I saw this problem during the campaign that was bothering me. Two, I wasn't super interested in potentially helping out I was helping out the Biden campaign a bit, but I wasn't super interested in going the administration route if he won. Um, but we met a lot of tech people in the campaign, and I had very little background in benchmark before this. Um, and I was excited about the idea of using technology to solve this problem, and something that I hadn't really tried before. And a friend of mine said, why don't you try to find some co-founders, brainstorm, see what happens. I'm not technical. I don't know much about software engineering, or at least I didn't at the time.
Yeah.
And I kind of went into this matchmaking thing. I think it was at Antler in New York, and I met Patrick, who is one of our co-founders, and Andrew. And it was great because Patrick's a data scientist and he's a full stack developer engineer. He was at Via Transportation and also the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. And Andrew was at Microsoft. He's our product developer designer. He's our chief product officer, Harvard Stanford guy. You have to have one of those, I think, on your team. Um,
It's
and
helpful.
we had like complementary skill sets. I'm the economist. I can do sort of the CEO stuff, and then Patrick's the builder, and then Andrew's a designer. I don't know what the phrase is, hacker, hipster, hustler, or something like that. So we had these
We'll go with
complementary
that.
skill sets, but like very similar values and sort of the vision of a more data open world. So we're like, let's try it. Why not? We have nothing to lose. Built a prototype, did some testing, got into Techstars, and yeah, here we are.
There's a lot I want to dive into with that, but one thing that in particular with what you just mentioned too, take me through your go-to-market, what you're thinking. Obviously, you build this thing out. There's a lot of early stage founders who are going to think about, how to go to market, what's the best way to go about it. I know I've been following along because we invested Vitalize Angels. So I'm curious for you, take me through that go-to-market decision to go. I know the background, how you did it, and what you did with that. Take me through that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something we struggle with at the beginning because we saw as okay, let's make data visualization simpler. That seems to be the core issue with data storytelling. We all had
Yeah.
experiences within organizations and enterprises. So we said, okay, let's go to the enterprise. Perhaps like the marketing team or the communications team, those non-technical departments will need us, right? It seemed like it was like a last mile problem within the enterprise. And we did a lot of customer discovery, and we realized, yeah, that is the case. The data team is a pretty big bottleneck, and these other non-technical teams, even though they're expected to use data for their work, from sales, customer success, marketing comms, struggled. Um, but we realized that going directly to enterprise or enterprise sales is a very long cycle, and
Yeah.
usually the CTO or the data team they don't see the problem. They're like, "What are you talking about?" They're like, "We're fine. We have code or Tableau." Whereas like the marketing comms teams are crying. Um, so we said, okay, like we don't really have the resources to go directly in enterprise, but is there something else we can do? Because a few of them were actually like former writers and journalists, and they would kind of point us to the direction of, like in the media industry, a lot of writers are leaving, like in the New York Times, Washington Post, to start their own Substacks, and they don't have teams anymore to help them. Maybe you can jump on that trend. So we started talking to the writers, and this is like a year ago, so Substack is really growing at this point. And we realized, yeah, okay, they have the same problem. They produce content, every day, and they can barely use Excel, let alone like the other tools. So they want something that can create charts quickly, but also they can do their research. So we thought, okay, this could be an interesting go to market because it kind of mirrors like a bottom up approach that other companies have done, where we kind of like Trojan horse it into the enterprise. So you kind of consumerize a product under a freemium model, get a free version, get a lot of users, and then you can figure out ways to convert them into paying users in a paid tier or in an enterprise tier. And we realized that a lot of the audience of the writers, so the writers are go to market because they're a cash flow positive marketing channel. Like they're actually even paying us to produce content, and when they push out that content to their audiences, it creates a lot of feedback loops and user generated content and network effects, and that drives signups. And we realize that so not only are they doing the work for us to get a big audience, but
Yep.
secondly, their audience is actually people like us who work like in the enterprise, who work in these departments that will start using it themselves and then kind of drag it in. We saw it work with TradingView. We have actually one of our other investors also, I think they're also in Chicago, Math, um, invested in TradingView. They had the same, very similar go to market, and it worked. We saw it with GitHub, even to an extent Slack. So we went for it, and we're actually executing it right now. So it's been really interesting.
How have you been going about that, just in terms of reaching out, figuring out who you want to reach out to, that process as well? Because you're obviously starting from zero, but you have this interesting background, this interesting company. Like, take me through that side of things.
Yeah, definitely. And something that might come up is we're realizing we're having a cold start problem too a little bit. So it's like some people
Yeah.
want to have content on the platform, but if there's no content, then they won't really use it. I think Reddit had a very similar issue.
Yeah.
But in terms of like outreach, we went directly to the top Substack writers. We did some data scraping. We said, okay,
Yep.
which content producers use data or charts or statistics? We reach out to them, kind of like survey them, see what their issues are, and then we did that, and we were like, okay, there's a big need here. This is great. But then it wasn't narrow enough. I thought it was narrow enough to do Substack writers, but apparently it wasn't niche enough. It's like, okay, but which topic are they talking on? Is it economics? Is it politics? Is it culture? Is it um, climate change or healthcare? That's a lot of data sets, right?
Yeah,
So
that's a
then we
lot.
realized, okay, and then based on what you just alluded to, my background, I said, okay, well, a lot of writers do current events. A lot of them do a lot of economics. Politics is very popular. I have that background too. Let's focus sort of there at the moment. And that's kind of like the beachhead we're kind of going for. But we also have to be nimble to sort of what is sort of salient news, like what's happening in the news and what people want to talk about. The easy thing about starting with economics is there's already a lot of publicly available data. So that's kind of part of the go-to-market, just a lot of public data. And then if you want to bring in proprietary, you do that after. But economics is pretty easy. And then we're actually going to do some political as well. It's a midterm year. People like talking about politics. So it might be a mix of economic data, maybe some polling data. And with my background, that's obviously quite helpful too. And back to the cold start, we're going to start producing some content ourselves as well to sort of get people on the platform. So a writer will come on and say like, "This is great. I love this tool, but where do I start? I need to get the data first." So we have to help them like find data, help them clean the data as well, and to start generating content. And then over time, other people will indirectly have created clean data sets for you to build upon their work. Because some writers will say, I see a really cool chart, but I can't click on it. It's a PNG doing the rounds online. It would take me half an hour to find the sourcing, so forget it. The cool thing about OpenAxis is whenever you create a chart, like there's always a backlink. You can always access the data set, and you can see what other people have come up with that an insight on that chart, on that data set. Sorry, we can look at the same data sets and come up with different insights. So if I find a data set on climate change and I see, wow, there's 14 different other people created charts in that. Oh, wow, that leads me to your Substack or to your media company. So then it becomes almost like a distribution channel for your content or acquisition channel for you to get more subscribers. So that's been really interesting that we kind of didn't really expect in terms of building content and community. But also now with
I want to double.
Yeah, sorry.
So go ahead.
No, just the last thing. Ukraine's obviously quite popular now, so we're trying to also kind of aggregate some stuff on Ukraine. And given my background, I'll probably put some content out there on sort of geopolitics, which is an industry that is usually qualitative. So it's very interesting to see a more quantitative approach to understanding what's happening.
Double clicking on that community aspect of it as well. How are you thinking about that side of the business with open access? How that's going to be powerful for you moving forward? I'd be curious to know more.
Yeah, definitely. So we're more and more becoming like a Pinterest or Instagram for data and charts. Like I didn't really think we'd do like the social media thing, but it's very interesting because people do want to collaborate.
Yeah.
And I think the community is going to be sort of our competitive moat sort of going forward. The first point is you have to have like a small like niche community. So like really just have a few people who love you and also create the content. But it also has to be a bit unique. So that's why we're targeting some of the top writers who talk about politics or economics and tapping into their sort of reader base and see how they kind of collaborate. We think very similar to like a Reddit or Wikipedia. You'll just have like a small percentage of people creating and then a large percentage of people consuming. But we also want to see what that looks like in terms of consumption. Like how does one collaborate around a data set or chart? Like how do you remix a data set or chart? So that's something that we're going to keep an eye on. But generally speaking, in terms of community, provide something that's valuable. In this case, it's usually like a unique data set and provide people a tool to actually contribute. So the easy chart creator and sort of see what happens. Because other places like you'll have like, it's just a one-sided publishing. Like if you're publishing data sets and content, that's cool. But if you're not giving me the tools to actually collaborate, then what's my incentive? And that's another thing. Like how do we incentivize people to contribute to the community?
Exactly.
Some existing communities like TradingView or even like doing analytics that does sort of for crypto, the incentive for me to contribute is financial, right? Like I want to make money in the markets. That's why I'm kind of contributing. So for ours, that incentive doesn't really exist. So like, why would you want to contribute to this open source community? We're trying to understand that now. There's a few things that are popping up. One is you just really love it. Like you're just like this nerd who like really wants to like contribute.
It's just cool. Yeah.
And that's why it's important to get like the niche community first of people who like love a topic. Secondly, you might be looking for a job. You want to kind of like put yourself out there in the shop window. You want to be like a data influencer and show everybody your analysis. Or third, like create your own brand and your own sort of your brand and your audience around it. So those are a few things that we're trying to explore in terms of incentives. And people also just love sharing charts with each other. So if we can give them the second level of giving the data as well and the tool, I think that that also gives them the opportunity to show off like, hey, look what I showed, look what I did.
Yeah, definitely a better content in terms of you look at newsletters and everything. You have that it's more rich media, having charts and data sets and everything, et cetera, that people can see. Like, oh my gosh, like look at this thing, it's much more shareable. And obviously on Twitter, that's what you're looking for. Things that get retweeted. So you have that access as well. with what you're doing too, just take me through where you look at the future in terms of this fitting into work. Obviously, we're investing in future work at Vitalize. We focus on that. That's why we brought you in. Where do you see this fitting in terms of as it moves forward, as it progresses, and big vision for how this fits in like the future of work with open access?
Yeah, absolutely. So the collaborative nature is going to be really important for the future of work. Being able to collaborate around data and charts to this point hasn't been easy, especially across departments. So as we go through our bottom up approach and get into the enterprise, we're going to offer sort of this collaborative tool in house. So like, if you're the comms department or sales department, you can easily like ask another department about a data set or chart and create your own instead of having the bottleneck that currently exists. So that's the one internal use case. But now at that point, this massive public community has already been created. So you can tap into it if you want to. So like, oh, if you want to find some external public data or charts or get some sort of inspiration, you can do that as well, and then pull it into whatever you want to do internally. And secondly, now because a big community exists, now you have a content marketing distribution platform. So if you're the comms and marketing team that's creating PDFs that nobody really reads, now you have a way to distribute it in bite-sized pieces to them. But in terms of future of work, yeah, it's just much more collaborative. It's not messy Excel sheets, version 8, 9, and 10 that get sent back and forth, or like, trouble with databases. It really kind of, I'll say it again, like it's like a last mile tool where like anybody, regardless of your technical ability, you'll be able to collaborate within your organization on data and charts. Very similar like the Figma with design, for example.
One thing I just want to take a giant step back here for a second. So you've obviously mentioned your experience varied across a lot of different things. One thing we didn't talk about is your attempts to go like professional soccer. Well, another day as well. But what I wanted, I'm curious about with your experience now, as this is your first company.
Yeah, I had a consultancy for macro geopolitical risk, but that's more traditional. So this is my first, I guess, tech
Yeah,
startup.
first
Yeah,
startup, tech
yeah.
startup. Yeah, just take me through where your head's at. What's the challenges that you've been going through? Just like give me the realness, Alex. Like this is first tech startup. I love hear any insights or anything from your experience so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So as you like point out, like I think I've done some pretty interesting stuff. It's been a roller coaster. Yes, I mean, none of this would have happened if I didn't fail at trying to go pro in soccer when I first graduated from undergrad. But I will say, despite all the experiences, this is by far the hardest thing I've ever done. It's very hard, but it's also the most fulfilling. Like to be able to do something with awesome people I work with that all could get really big paying jobs if they wanted to, or like slumming it trying to figure this out because it's fun, it's worthwhile, and it's fulfilling, and there's a massive vision. That being said, like I'm learning very fast about a lot of sort of frameworks. I think talking to other founders has been immense. I think having awesome investors like you guys has also been very helpful. But it's tough. It's a roller coaster. I'm learning also to wear many hats. Obviously, right? There's not a lot of people, but
Yep.
I think understanding how to work with your teammates is very important. I don't think there's a cookie cutter solution. I think you have to understand the qualities and idiosyncrasies of your teammates and sort of mold around them. So we've created frameworks and processes to make us sort of go fast. But yeah, it's talking to users is actually a lot of fun, and I think
Yeah.
something that kind of comes across in my background is just a lot of curiosity. So like I love learning about different people or different things. So if I get a chance to talk to users every day, like what do you like, what is a problem, I think that's been really fun. um, Not so fun is maybe them not like answering an email or onboarding with you, or I don't want to say lie, but it's very interesting when people give you feedback verbally versus when they give you feedback using the product. So I'm learning about that as well. I'm learning about the whole product market fit process. So it's been super fun, but also very stressful. But I wouldn't have it any other way.
It's an impossible open question to answer. So I appreciate you sharing all of that as well. And I know we're almost out of time here. So where's the best place for people to learn more about open access and connect with you if they'd like to as well, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. So openaxis.com. It's open AXIS. I'm sure you'll get the whatever double entendre there, whatever. And then on Twitter, I have Alex underscore Damianou is my last name. And you'll find us also on Instagram and LinkedIn. We're going to start pumping out a lot more content, so that should be fun. and we have our private beta, so you can sign up for the beta waitlist and probably get access immediately, actually. So yeah.
Perfect. Alex, thank you so much for the time today. A lot of fun.
Thanks, Justin. A lot of fun too. Take care.